Welcome to the Drachneck and Friends official podcast, where we peel back the curtain on puzzle games and the people who make them. I'm Syrenne, the producer at Drachneck and Friends, and I'm joined as always by Alan Hazelden, the head Drachneck at Drachneck and Friends.
Hey there.
Today, we're joined by Robin and Jeremy, who you may know from their work on The Roottrees Are Dead. How are you doing today?
I'm good.
Pretty good. A little tired. It's a tiny bit early for me, but we wanted to make sure that this time works for everyone, so...
Awesome. Well, we appreciate the scheduling of cross-continental podcast recording as usual. Can you introduce yourselves with, maybe name, pronouns, some of the what you've done on different projects?
Sure. I'm Jeremy. He, him. I was the lead designer, original designer of the itch.io version of The Roottrees Are Dead. I've been a game developer for a really long time, about 16 years now, but that was my first sort of solo release. And Robin, who's also here, I'll let him talk in just a moment. He's the one that reached out to me to make the Steam version. So most of our listeners, I imagine, you're going to be wanting to thank him.
Okay, I'll go now. I'm Robin, also he, him. I'm actually fairly new to game development. I did make a web-based role-playing game some time ago, but for the most part, my career, I've been doing web and UI stuff. And yeah, I reached out to Jeremy and said, and I guess we'll get into this, so we might want to circle back. But I saw his game and I loved it, and I helped bring it to Steam. And then he was generous enough to give me a co-designer credit because of all the work we did on the game.
Awesome. What got y'all into game development in the first place?
So I've been... it's kind of a weird story where I played a lot of video games as a kid, and when it came time for me to look into what I was going to do for college, I had no idea. I had also been in musicals and stuff, and I thought about getting like a musical theater degree, but my parents, my dad and my stepmom, who are also into video games, I guess they saw some kind of advertisement somewhere, one of those really cheesy old advertisements that we all used to make fun of, for like a college that would offer video game development as a degree. And they said, hey, how about this? And I hadn't really given it much thought. I'm kind of a laid-back, easygoing kind of guy. And I was like, oh, yeah, that sounds kind of interesting. And I looked into that. And so I went to one of those cheesy schools that we all used to make fun of. And I kind of got lucky. A lot of people that get into the games industry, especially back then, it's because they knew someone. And I just happened to make a friend in college who happened to have some connection into the industry. And, it just kind of happened from that. Friends of friends recommend each other. And that's how I got into the games industry. So I can't say I always wanted to be a game designer or anything. But when it came time to figure out what to do with my life, it sort of dropped in my lap. And it seemed like as good a thing as any. And I really do enjoy doing it now. So.
And what kind of games were you working on before Roottrees?
So before Roottrees, I've worked on a few different things. A lot of them, though, are racing games. So when I first started, my first actual industry job was at a place that doesn't exist anymore called Big Bang Entertainment. And we were... There's one major studio that was in Phoenix, Arizona, which is where I lived, called Rainbow Studios. And Rainbow Studios, they were laying off a bunch of people, as you do in the games industry, and they happened to lay off a whole team all at once. And this whole team said, hey, we're a whole team of people that can make a video game, so how about we form a new studio? And that was Big Bang Entertainment. And Big Bang Entertainment, they had connections. They worked with the people that worked at Big Bang had worked at Sony before. And so my first industry job, I was kind of a junior designer at Big Bang Entertainment working on racing games. And for whatever reason, just getting that experience as my first experience meant that I kind of looped back through a lot of racing game studios after that. So I did work eventually at a place called Rainbow Studios. They made MX vs. ATV. I worked at a small studio called 2XL Games. They made some motocross games. It's been kind of all over the place. A lot of miscellaneous stuff here and there, but racing games have always been at the core of that, which is funny because I don't play a lot of racing games.
That is funny. For me, I've always loved games. I actually don't really. I guess when I was very young. So what happened is my dad worked for IBM, and when the first IBM home PC came out, the 5150, he took the employee purchase plan and bought one at great expense. I think he said it was about $3,000 of like 1980s money, so that was like a enormous amount of money. And I took to it very quickly. And we had this game, King's Quest, which some people might have heard of, especially if you're on the older side like me. And I just was obsessed with it. And honestly, I never really stopped. Like people told me, like, oh, when you get older, you'll stop playing games. But if anything, I play more games now. Like I'm always playing something. I usually have something I play with my wife, something I play on the side. So for me, I always tried playing, tweaking with games and learning to make games. But when I was like, when I was in my teens, Toronto, where I'm from, there wasn't many game studios. Like it didn't seem to be an option. The Canadian game dev scene, which I think started more with like Ubisoft in Montreal, was like more in my late 20s and stuff. So I ended up getting into web development, which I really liked. And then I took like a 20-year detour basically where I made a lot of web apps. And I worked on a fairly successful piece of software called Discourse, not to be confused with Discord, which a lot of people do, but it's Discourse, the open source forum software. And I worked there for like a decade and, came from like, I was like the co-founder up until like 80 employees. And I was in a very privileged position to sell my shares when we did a funding round. I sold a lot of my shares and was able to then say, okay, I want to get back into game development. And that's kind of where I started. And I was working on my own prototype at the time where I played the Roottrees Are Dead. And then that's when I reached out to Jeremy. So like for me, it's honestly like professionally, it's quite a new thing to make games, but not so much software.
And did either or both of you play a lot of the detective-y games?
You mean like Oberdin?
Like Oberdin, Golden Idol.
Look, I love those games. I know I let Jeremy answer as well, but like I think we're both big fans of Oberdin. That game really was something special for me. Like I mentioned, I loved Sierra games growing up and point-and-click adventure games. Like those were my big thing. And so I always liked games that had like a narrative and puzzles, and I still do. And when Oberdin came out, it introduced what I thought was a really novel mechanic, which is, you're solving a puzzle, but you have to lock in a certain amount of things at once to get it correct. And I'd never seen a game that did that before. Like I'm pretty certain Lucas Pope came up with that concept, and I love it. And when I saw Golden Idol came out, which I found out because I was getting into the Godot game engine, and that's actually how I found out about that game. They were like, "Oh, this game in Godot is somewhat successful." I'm like, "Wait, it's another Oberdin? This is exactly my jam." So like for me, it's like probably my favorite genre of game, and why I was so taken with Roottrees Are Dead once Jeremy put it up on itch.
So for me, I play a lot of puzzle games. It doesn't really matter so much what the exact genre is. So I did play Oberdin, but I played Oberdin mostly because, as one does, whenever you finish a puzzle game and you want to play another puzzle game, you go out there and say, "Hey, I just did this. What do I do next?" That's kind of a staple in this genre. And everyone, of course, recommended Oberdin, so I checked it out, and I really liked it quite a lot. I hadn't played any other games like it before, but I would also say that before Oberdin, there weren't any other games like Oberdin. It's kind of a new genre now. Now, there have been other detective-y games like, the Sherlock Holmes games, I think Nancy Drew games. I haven't played any of those really, but I've played, I would say, almost all of the major puzzle game releases. Anything that gets a lot of hype or a lot of critical acclaim, I played pretty much all of those, with some exceptions. And that's how I got into Oberdin, and that's where Roottrees came from. So I would say it's not necessarily my favorite genre, but I enjoy it quite a lot. My favorite genre is probably more like Myst-likes. Myst is, I think, the first fully dedicated puzzle game that I remember playing, if you don't count things like Tetris, which is a very different type of puzzle. But Myst, and then way later in life, Riven and the other sequels to Myst. That's my jam. Oberdin doesn't really fit in with that, but I put it more in the same headspace that I use when I play things like Sudoku or those logic puzzles that we all kind of grew up with in school, where you're given a bunch of hints and you figure out which person wasn't in which room and which pet they had or something like that. And so when I played Oberdin, it was an extension of that in a way that I'd never seen, and I really, really liked it a lot. And I still think that it's the best one of that type. I don't think anyone surpassed it yet. I don't know if anyone ever will. It's hard to beat the first one. Yeah, so that's where my history with Oberdin came from, and that's also where Roottrees came from. I'm not shy about saying it's a direct, I don't want to use the word ripoff, but it's a direct kind of ripoff of some of the things that I felt while playing Oberdin. So
Yeah, did you play that and immediately go, wow, I want to make something like this? Or did it like come a little later? You like starting a game and like, oh, I could do something like that? Like, how did the initial idea, where did that come from?
Oh, so it came actually quite a bit later, maybe a couple of years later. So I do every year, I do the Global Game Jam. And I've been doing it, I think, something like 13 years in a row now. So I've been in all of them for 13 years. And the way that it's been going more and more recently, I say starting about 4 or 5 years ago, I would make a game over the 48 hours that we were given, and then I'd take about a month, because you get attached to a game that you make in that 48 hours, even if it's not great. I'd take a month and sort of make it better. Do all the things that we had on the whiteboard when we were designing our Game Jam game. I'd do those things, and then I'd release it either to itch.io, or for a while it was just to the Global Game Jam website, or I'd show it to my friends or whatever. And in 2023, the theme for the Global Game Jam was roots. And I was just trying to think of what to do for that. I don't know why, but I'm very glad that I did this. I don't know why I made Roottrees Are Dead, but it came directly from that. The title, even, Roottrees, came directly from that. I just sort of had that flash of inspiration. I was like, well, what kind of games do I like, and what could I make on my own? And we'll probably talk in just a minute. When I say on my own, I mean with help from a friend who had access to Midjourney. But what can I make in a short time period that is a very logic-y game that fits the theme of roots? And that's just where Roottrees Are Dead came from. It was originally intended to be much more logic-based. So the whole idea I thought of is, okay, a family tree has these certain inherent connections of names being passed down in certain ways. And if you know that there's 2 parents and 4 kids, and you see 5 names of the same last name, you can go, oh, maybe these fit in this spot. It was all meant to be a big logic puzzle based around the rules of family trees. And it definitely, as everyone listening to this knows who's played it, spiraled way beyond that. So now there's a lot of clues like, okay, you have to do context clues for reading and things like that. But originally, it was just supposed to be a family tree puzzle. Now, for those of you that have played the Steam version and unlocked the secret game in there, Family Doku, that is a better indicator of what was originally in my head when I envisioned the Roottrees Are Dead and what that would be.
And do you think there was a moment when it's like shifted? You're like, oh, I've added a little bit of this thing and suddenly this is like way more compelling? Or like, yeah, how did it shift from what it started as to what it is now?
It kind of shifted by necessity. So there were definitely clues in the original. What is the spoiler policy here? Are we assuming everyone listening to this has played Roottrees?
Oh, we can go full spoilers if you'd like, and we can just put a spoiler warning in the episode description.
We don't have to. I'm just trying to be careful because I'll use one example. I'll try and keep it vague. So, okay. For example, one of the first puzzles I came up with ever would that there be a musician in the family, and the musician would have an album cover, and on the album cover would be a reference to a magazine, but the reference to the magazine would use slang. And so you'd have to not only try and seek out the article in the magazine, but you'd also have to search for the name of the slang of the magazine to figure out what the magazine actually is. So that's a very simple puzzle, and it is in the final game now. I don't think anyone struggles with it, but it is one of the original things that I came up with. And that kind of thing was just supposed to be the light puzzling that happened outside of the logic of the games. And so the more that I had this giant family tree, and the more hints that you needed to solve it, the more I kind of delved into that territory of requiring large amounts of information almost by necessity, because with the tree has, I think, like 50 main people on it and a bunch of side, like, optional people that you have to fill out. And there was just far too many places that everyone could technically go just based on their last names and based on that logic that I originally had the idea of. So it just kind of grew out of what I needed to happen. And also, the more that I started writing that stuff, sorry, I should clarify, the more I started writing things in universe about the family and the things that they were doing and the connections they had to each other, the more I enjoyed it. And so it just kind of ballooned from there. So started by necessity and then just kind of became fun. So.
But there was a point where you decided, like, you took it from the logic puzzle, you added a text box. Like, that's a major change, right? Like, that you could, and I'm talking about searching the web.
So that was actually there from the beginning, but it was just meant to have a much smaller footprint. So like I said, the whole magazine thing, you still were supposed to originally see the album cover, go, oh, there's going to be an article in a magazine I could use from somewhere. I have to search the internet to figure that out. But if you look at the original prototype, the window was tiny. Like, there wasn't going to be a lot of information, and even the captions on the photos, because it did involve photos of people. The captions on the photos were really simple at the beginning because I didn't think we would need more. It was going to be like, oh, gathered again, like we do every 20 years. And that was like the whole caption. But if you've played it now, you know that the captions and everything about the family, there's full diary entries, things like that. There's a whole lot of information about this family out there, and you cross-reference all of it with each other. And that's kind of became the fun of the game.
At what point did you decide that there needed to be a lot of different places for the player to go gather information, like on a computer and like on the photo captions, like all this other stuff? Like, did that come out of the necessity of continuing to need more information, or was that like always a key part of the experience in your head?
From the very beginning, I had the internet, a library, and magazines. All three of those were there from the beginning because I felt that those would make the most sense for what a player in the 1990s would be searching for. I would say that that was there from the beginning. Like I said, and it was supposed to be in a lessened state than it is now. I guess, yeah. I don't really have much else to say when it comes to that because it was there from the beginning, but I didn't know the extent of the amount of content I would end up having to write, which Robin can attest to is a very large amount.
Yes, I think this is like it's interesting. I was thinking about this recently because we just went through to jump ahead chronologically. Like, we're about to launch translations into 3 languages very soon, and it's about 100,000. It's over 100,000 words for the game. So it's a novel, essentially. And I think there's this thing in writing where a lot of people are encouraged to be concise and stuff like that. But this is one of those cases where, like, I think verbosity is an advantage because it fills in the world. And one thing I've always been impressed with Jeremy is his ability to just write and write and write. Now, there's a little bit of me, and especially with Roottrees Mania, I filled in some of the world building, and I actually had a super fun time doing it. But it's like, when I sat down to write some of the articles, almost all about side stuff, like just extraneous world building kind of lore stuff, like just how time consuming it is to write all that stuff and come up with a clever idea, like for each article. like what is the interesting aspect? Like if a user searches this, I want them to find something interesting. And it's very time consuming. And I really appreciated that you were able to create so much of it.
I mean, honestly, immersive is such an easily thrown around word, but like by having not just necessary details, it does, like, I think really enhance the experience personally, and that's one of the things that I really liked about this game outside of just the sort of logicality that you have to apply. So one of my questions as you were talking about the design process, to what extent were certain mysteries, like certain people on the family tree, sort of like, did the answers come first and then the rest of like the world around it was built to as a vehicle to deliver the information, versus, well, it would be really good if there was a book that said this and like this is this, and so that's something that we need to throw into one of the characters?
So a lot of it started, actually, I'll say all of it. All of it started with the tree itself. The way I went about designing the game from the ground up is that I had no idea really where to begin, except that I knew I needed the tree to have these logic pieces in it. And I wanted some of those logic pieces to be kind of simple because that was the original idea. And so I built a tree. I just started at the top and was like, okay, I'm going to just take it piece by piece. This person at the top is going to have 5 kids. And the reason they're going to have 5 kids is because I want the tree to expand a lot as I go down through the generations. Like, that was it. That was the only reason that there's 5 kids at the top. And then I started coming up with interesting patterns below that. So I'm going to very, very minor spoilers. You don't have to turn this off, but there is one of those 5 kids has the most kids out of any of the rest of them. They have 4. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be funny if this person with 4 kids, each of those 4 kids hated all their siblings, and they're like, I'm never having more than 1 kid. So they each have 1 kid below them. So, and that happened. Like on the tree, it didn't happen in the story, but originally in my comprehension of the story, when I was building the tree, I was like, okay, so one of them has 4 kids. Each of them is only going to have 1 kid by design, and the simple explanation would be at some point the player finds out that all of them hated having so many siblings, and they're like, we've made a pact that each of us is only going to have 1 kid. That never ended up being part of the final story, but that's kind of where I started from. I was just like, okay, let's make an interesting tree, come up with explanations for why these people have the kids they do, and try and make it so that, okay, if there's maybe only one person that has 3 kids, these people have a couple kids over here, these people have a couple kids over here. I'll design a puzzle at some point that lets you figure out which pair of siblings belongs to which person. And so that's where I started, because I didn't really know where to begin. So I decided just to start with what the player would be filling out. And then as I went, I did come up with certain things like, okay, the people at the bottom of the tree, because this takes place in 1998, some of them will have internet presences. So you can start working from the bottom of the tree and then work up from there. But the people at the top of the tree, in 1998, the internet kind of sucks. How am I going to get you engrossed into that section? And I thought, okay, well, someone could have had some kind of published information about their family, gossip, things like that. And that did end up making its way into the final game. So I would say I started with the tree, added some big pieces in my head that I knew I wanted to kind of get you engrossed in the tree, and then built those and tested it, and it very clearly wasn't enough very quickly. And that's where everything else came from, though, is that core in the middle.
And how did you figure out where the player should start? Like which part of the puzzle they should start out with?
So the story of the game begins with a cutscene that says 3 people who are very, very rich died in a plane crash. That was always there. I don't know why I chose that. My girlfriend watches a lot of YouTube stuff about plane crashes. I guess that's probably where that came from, honestly. Shout out to Mentor Pilot. It's a YouTube channel. And so I started with that because originally the entire motivation for the game was going to be financial. So it was all about, okay, these people died. They were very young. They didn't have a great will. They're very rich. And the money's going to be spread to the rest of the family. And that was kind of an Oberdin homage. In Oberdin, you're playing an insurance adjuster, and at the end, you do sort of do some paperwork that affects what people earn. And this was going to be similar to that, but in terms of genealogy. And so that was always there from the very beginning, and it informed some of the other decisions. So the reason that I start with the tree at the bottom. So the first thing you do in the game is identify those 3 people that died in the plane crash. That came directly from the story that I came up with, and it also was it made sense as a jumping off point that if these are the most famous, richest people in the family, that it should be very easy to put them in. And that's where that began.
I can say, as like someone who played the game, after the itch version was released, that the beginning is really enticing. Like just even the title, which I think we had a very brief discussion about whether we would change the title, and we decided like, no, it's just such a great title to go with. But it's like the Roottrees are dead. Like it starts with this. It's like something horrible has happened. And I think like a lot of people, when they want to play a mystery game, they're like, oh, this game is going to be about solving the mystery of a plane crash, or it's going to be about figuring out who these people are. And I don't want to say like bait and switch in a bad way, but I think it actually was really smart, because if the game had positioned itself as this is a game about just figuring out, like solving a family tree to help out a mysterious person, that's less exciting than this starts with a plane crash thing, which actually ends up being a very small part of the story. Do you agree with that, Jeremy? Like, was that intentional?
It was not intentional. So, yeah. But I agree with it. Yes, yeah. Definitely. The way the game begins, which is the plane crash and someone coming to you, it was supposed to be in the middle of the night. I think I've said this in a few different places. So if you've read anything I've talked about this story, I apologize to everyone out there who's about to get a duplicate answer. But I was inspired by the movie Arrival, which is a movie about aliens coming to Earth. That's not a spoiler; it's in the trailer. So, but in Arrival, what's really interesting is the main character is a linguistics professor at a college, and she gets approached in the middle of the night by a guy in a helicopter that lands and is like, "Hey, we need your help." And for whatever reason, that has always stuck with me. What situation has led to a linguistics professor receiving a helicopter on their lawn in the middle of the night saying, "We need your help"? And I was like, well, what could do that for a genealogist? And so it was originally, the story was all about the financial stuff. And when I put the first prototype, not even the whole story, but just a first prototype with many of the people lock-inable, that's a weird phrase, and many of the people able to be locked in, I quickly received a lot of questions of like, why am I doing this? Sure, it's fun. That was my answer. I was like, well, is it fun? Don't you want to keep playing because it's a puzzle? And they're like, yeah, but why? And I was like, okay, I guess I have to answer that. And so it does shift. The story by the end of the game is very different than where you started in the headspace at the beginning of the game. And I do think of it as a bait and switch. I was really worried about that, by the way. When I finished the story, one of the concerns I had is, would people that started the story and were interested in the story at the beginning, by the time I got to the end, go, this game is different than I thought it would be. This final mystery especially, which I won't get into, but the final mystery is not what I thought I'd be working with. I thought people would maybe be turned off by that, but it's been the opposite. People tend to like how the story shifts partway through and becomes what I'd call more personal and less financial. So,
yeah, I think from a marketing perspective, selling a game called "Fill in the Roottree Family" or something, or the Roottree Family, is much more would be much harder than the Roottrees are dead. Starts off with a bang. I really like that.
Yeah, I think that's true. And also, like, you get this really nice moment after that tutorial area where you like solve these 3 people, and then suddenly you see the scope of the whole tree. It's like, oh wow, this is so many people, that like if you just started with that, it would land very differently, I think.
Yes, I was worried about that too. I lampshade it for sure. because that was what I was greeted with by my playtesters. It's like, oh my god, what are you getting me into? So I put in a thing, the character who comes to you and says, by the way, this family tree you're about to see, it's a lot. Ah, but I'm sure you'll be okay. And I thought that that joke was enough, and I think it works pretty well. But yeah, the moment that that whole tree unveils, it's a big moment, and I was worried people would turn off the game when they saw that.
I think I'm a fan. This will probably come up later too, but like I'm a fan of crossword puzzles, and I play them most days. And one of my favorite things is when you start with a giant puzzle and you're like, this seems impossible, and you just fill in what you can, and then you realize by filling in what you can just fill in other things, and the game kind of works along the same mechanisms of that. It's like this seems impossible, but as you just fill in what you can, and then once you know that, you can know other things and stuff like that. But I have heard some studies have shown that people who are new to crosswords, like they'll start with a big puzzle, and if they can't get an answer in, say, the first 5 or 10 clues, they'll quit and walk away. And that's a big problem because like a lot of puzzles are designed that like you actually can't. You're not expected to know those until you get some of the down or whatever. Like people think it's like trivia. It's like either they have it or they don't. And what they don't realize is by having some letters in there, they can fill in the rest. And I think it's really good what you did, because if the game started with that, I think some people would be like, my brain isn't up to this. But by starting with just 3 sisters, it makes it much more palatable. And even then, you do a little more because there's the notable root trees, right? You're like, your first goal is these 3, and then your next goal is these 10. So don't even worry about the rest of the tree. Just start with these 10 and then see where that leads you, right?
Yeah, and I think by that point, you've just got a sense of like, oh, it's really satisfying to fill in these parts of the tree. And so like, even if somebody was not engaging with the story, I think like the act of filling in this tree is very Moorish. And so it would be compelling, even if the story was very bland. Once you've kind of got them hooked at that point.
For sure.
You've touched on playtesters. I'd love to hear both about playtesting the original game, but also like, did you do a lot of playtesting for the remake?
Yes, actually, and there's a lot of crossover between those two things. So the way that I handled playtesting is like any game that I work on, the first person that I go to is any friend of mine that will say yes to playtesting a game at the moment. So at the time, I think my first playtester was Nick Vaccaro, who's another puzzle game developer. He developed a game called Valley of Shadow. And he and we get along really well, just conversationally. We talk about puzzles a lot. And so I was like, hey, I have a new thing. Would you be able to check it out? And of course, he said yes, because he's a great dude. And when he played it, I think it's the first time I've ever put a solo game jam game in front of someone and they've been super hyped. It was a new thing for me. A lot of my game jam games really suck, as game jam games do. But this one went really well. And so it was just the tutorial and a little bit more. And he was invested already. And so I was like, okay, that's a good sign. So I started working on it more. I had him play through as much of the game as I could make. But at some point, especially with puzzle games and thinky games, once you've played through something, you sort of learn how its tricks work, and also the evolution of a game. You know, if he ran into a problem and I made a change, when he goes back to the game and sees the change I made, that is a clue that your average ordinary player would not get. This has changed, it must be important. So at some point I needed more playtesters. I approached more of my friends. Some of them liked it, some of them bounced off of it because it just wasn't their style of game. And then when I got to the point where I was pretty happy with the story and being fully possible to quote unquote beat the game and solve everyone, then I started approaching people I didn't know. And the way that I did that was I just went to Reddit, the Oberdin subreddit, and said, hey, I'm working on a game for people that like Oberdin. Do you want to test my game? And then a bunch of people volunteered, and I grabbed them. Now, for me, I find it to be really important, almost as important as the fact that strangers are playing my game, that I can see what they're doing while they play. So I only got volunteers that would be willing to record their screen. Now it didn't have to be like a Twitch stream. They didn't have to be on camera or anything. But I wanted their thoughts aloud and what they were seeing. And the reason for that is because, especially in a game like this, seeing what they were searching for was just as important as seeing the things that they found successfully. So that their unsuccessful searches were just as important, if not more important, than their successful searches that allowed them to beat the game. And a lot of my playtesting was seeing things that people would search for in the game and going, oh man, in this world that I've created, as the curator of this fake world that doesn't really exist, I have to decide if someone would have searched for that, should they have found some information about, for example, okay, I said someone was an architect. Well, if I say they're an architect, then theoretically they've built buildings. So if someone searches for someone's name, there's probably some record, no matter how old this person is, of the buildings that they built somewhere, some historical thing. So I should add a small blurb that might be a minor hint towards this person. A lot of, we talked earlier about, the depth and how much I've written. I've basically written a full book. And a lot of that came from someone searching for a thing that I never thought about. And I'd have to assess, oh, maybe I should add something into the game because it would have existed in this world that I've created. And so we had all these playtesters. They played through the game. They were enjoying it immensely, which was awesome. I watched every single one. I've watched so many people play this game throughout the process of development. And then when it came time to do the remake, I approached all of them again first because I trusted them. I'd seen them play. I had seen how they played, and we could use that as a comparison. So I think the first thing, when Robin was looking for playtesters for his version, I think I hit up everyone that had playtested the original game. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it's true. I did do a small playtest in person at, what is the name? Narroscope. I brought the game there, and that was like kind of the first time someone had played the new interface, and I watched a bunch of people. And that was interesting because, like you said, someone ended up playing it for over an hour, and I was like, wow, that's a lot for a game that's just sitting on a laptop in a cafeteria, that was really, I was like, ooh, maybe we actually made a good game. It was that feeling. But yeah, we mostly did that. I had a few friends as well that had been excited about what I was working on, and we brought them in, but I think we staggered it. I think, here's the thing, if you gave all the testers access to the game at once and they all hit the same roadblock, that doesn't give you a chance to fix that and adjust it. So it's actually beneficial to have people at various stages in the game play testing it at once, especially when the game is going to take them 15 hours, including Roottrees Mania, maybe more.
And then it did come time where we would need people that hadn't played the original two, because it was a really important thing to make sure that we hadn't accidentally made the original game harder with the new interface. And we didn't ever run into that problem, actually, I don't think. But for that, I believe the first thing we did was ask our current playtesters if there was anyone that they knew and trusted that hadn't played the game before. And we got a few people that way, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. And then from our Discord, I think there was some trusted people, people who had shown a huge interest in the first game and were active members of the community. We also reached out to them.
And that was a Discord for the new game that you after you'd announced, hey, we're making this, you just started that up and people came.
So I actually made the Discord as part of the original game.
Okay.
It was just... I made a Discord because I had been part of, like I said, I brought up Nick's game earlier, Valley of Shadow, and then there's another puzzle game developer named Mason. I want to say his last name's Ramali. It might be Ramali. I apologize if I got that wrong. He made a game called Way of Rhea, and I was part of his Discord too. And it was really interesting to be part of these Discords where I could actually talk to the creator of the game after I played their demo or their playtest. I really liked that. And so I made a Discord for Roottrees because I figured, people are going to want to come ask for help. And I put the Discord link in the game because that's what I had seen before. But then, as kind of a joke, and also just to see if people were actually playing the game, there's something in the Roottrees are dead. I won't say even how you get there or what it is. but it says, if you see this message, go to the Discord and type something. And I put that in there just to see if anyone would do it. And it turns out a lot of people do it. So a lot of people came to the Discord just to type that message. And it was really cool to watch all these people just kind of pop into the Discord. Some of them stuck around, some of them didn't. But it gave me this sense that, hey, people are actually playing and enjoying my game. Because in order to find that, you have to do some weird stuff. It's not like it's just not part of the main part of the game. You have to think outside the box a little bit. And so that's the Discord community kind of built up from the original itch.io version of the game, just based on that silly little message I put in. And then we had this built-in community of people that were excited. When I made the announcement that we're making a remake, we already had probably, if not a couple hundred or 1,000 people in the Discord at that point.
I think it was about 1,000, yeah.
It's pretty awesome, yeah.
It's interesting because I just yesterday had a call with another game developer who's made a very popular puzzle game, and they said our Discord is twice the size of theirs, and I'm like, that literally blew my mind. I was like, I had no idea that it was so much bigger. And I think our conclusion is you accidentally stumbled on a huge marketing hack by encouraging people to interact with our Discord, let's say. And yeah, that was really cool because when you're making a new game on Steam, the number one metric they tell you to push is the wish lists. And we were able to, go into our Discord and say, hey, look, there's this remake coming out. The best way you can support us is to wish list us. And that was key in helping us reach that initial hurdle.
I'm curious with the remake, like when you originally saw the game, you're like, oh wow, I really want to turn this into a polished commercial game without the AI art. In some ways, the scope of that is fairly clear. But I'm curious if there was anything that came up during development that was like unexpectedly like involved or like went differently to how you were expecting it to.
It's a good question. I do think the scope was pretty clear, and that's one reason why I was enthusiastic about doing it, because Jeremy hit on that he tested the game extensively. So by the time I played it on itch, it was like the game was very solid. The base design was very solid, and I think what was holding it back was two things. One was the AI art and one was the interface. And I was like, and by the way, the interface is good. It certainly didn't stop many people from playing it. But I was like, I come from a background in interface design, and I had some ideas about, how to improve the game. And some of that is, like the hint system and the way to highlight things in the notebook and stuff like that. So even very early on, when I was speaking to Jeremy, we had a call and I was like, I think we could have a hit system. I think it could have a notebook that does this. I think we could have a 3D room that you can interact with. I think that first call, we discussed every single thing that I wanted to do. It's possible that over time we did add to it. But yeah, I'm trying to think of like any snags that we might have hit.
I wouldn't call it a snag, but I will say that I think the biggest question mark for both of us, especially it ended up being on your plate, because to give a very minor background, I was not able to work on the Roottrees remake. I'd rather not talk about the details of why, but I was not able to work on the Roottrees remake. And so when it came time to do that, I had a very limited amount of time that I'd call to pass it off. I call it a handoff period, where I had to get Robin everything, all the code, everything, and also not only that, but my feedback and ideas for the directions of the game. But then we had a lot of discussions of, are people going to play a remake of a game that is still out there for free? We knew we weren't going to take down the original. That was part of both of us were in agreement on that. But the question was, how do we get people that have played the Roottrees Are Dead for free to pay money to play it again, and how much should it cost? And those were some pretty in-depth discussions, and the conclusion we came to was, we want more content. And I don't think either of us knew what that meant exactly, but we did know we wanted more content. And so it turned out that Roottrees Mania, it was a lot larger probably than Robin originally envisioned.
Definitely.
And that was my fault. Like you said, once I get writing, I kind of just keep writing. And so I did a lot of that within a month and a half, 2 months, and got it into a playable, testable state in the original version of the game and gave it to Robin, and he played it, and you could talk about the rest, but yeah.
Yeah, like when we discussed adding extra content, I thought we're going to add 4 or 5 people to the tree, honestly. Like I thought it was just going to be a little bonus. But Jeremy, for whatever, just
For whatever reason, you can say it. For whatever reason, this is how my brain works.
For whatever reason, Jeremy just, when he got started, and he just kept doing it, and he just kept working and working. And I think there was this zone, this oh no zone, where it was like, okay, because here's the way I'm totally comfortable talking about how financially how the game worked. Like
Absolutely.
I was putting up the money for the art, which was our biggest expense. We wanted, because it had AI art, we wanted a professional illustrator, and that was our single most expensive expense. I was in a fortunate position that I didn't have to pay, myself. I was working just in my own spare time, so I was like, programming is free, but art is expensive. And we did end up doing voice acting, which was probably our second most expensive thing, but it was a smaller compared to the art, because I actually don't recall how many pieces. I think it was probably roughly 30 bespoke illustrations in the base game. And yeah, so there was this thing that each illustrated piece by Hennig was going to cost a significant amount of money. So it's like, oh yeah, 5 extra pieces. Yeah, we can budget for that. So Jeremy was somewhat aware of this when he was creating, drafting up this new content. But it got to the point where it's like, I think we ended up with 20 extra illustrations. And it was this thing like, well, this is a significant expense. This is almost doubling the budget that we had set out for the game. So when I was playing it, there's this scary aspect, which is like, I'm already assuming some risk by putting up the money and paying for this game that might never make its money back. Now, am I prepared to double that? And that's scary. So Jeremy did do a good job of trying to use some tricks in Roottrees Media to use less art. And it's interesting because the amount of articles that you search is about the same in both games, but the artwork is about 20 versus 30 pieces.
Yeah, so part of the actual design of Roottrees Mania, I would say somewhat came from the fact that I was worried every time I added a new piece of art that it would cost Robin more. Because my goal was not to balloon the scope of the game in terms of budget. So some of the tricks Robin's talking about, Roottrees Mania has a lot more of a spread out feeling. A lot of people have noticed this. Like, you get these pockets of different people and they don't overlap with each other. Whereas the main Roottrees family, there's big pictures full of tons of people. And those end up being the most expensive pieces to make. They take a lot of time. You have a lot of, you have to make sure that they're laid out in interesting ways and that there's a ton of people in them and an interesting background. And so for Roottrees Mania, there's a lot more pockets of people that they'll never interact with each other, they'll never overlap. And that was part of the design, came from the fact that I knew that those art pieces would be less of an issue to do and to cut. If we needed to cut any of it because of scope, we could just cut this section of the family and be done with that. So that's part of where Roottrees Mania's design came from. And I do apologize. It all worked out in the end.
Yeah, but there was a moment where I was like, okay, let's play this and let's see what you've done, Jeremy. And I was like, of course I liked it. I loved it, in fact. Like I'm just like, I love these kinds of games, and there was just more. And I was really excited to have more. Now, it was rough around the edges because, the first time I played Roottrees, I was playing a tested version. In Roottrees Mania, I was literally the first player. And it was rough. Like, it was shoehorned into the original game engine as a way so that we could work on it in parallel. Because actually, not even in parallel, because I think at that point, the Godot version of the game, which is a ground-up rewrite, I don't know. Like, it was a very loose prototype at that point. It was not suitable to be played.
I think it was just the room. Just the room you could move around in, and maybe a computer you could search for stuff on.
I did get the computer and searching very quickly, you're right, but the family tree took a very long time to get right, especially with all the pop-up windows and all that context and stuff. So yeah, it was like, we have to do this in the original engine. And it was rough. There was some issues, like some things were too hard. I remember blasting through something that was too easy. So it ended up, taking a fair amount of work, but I was still like, this is good. Okay, let's do this. And part of me was thinking, like, I'm already in on this game. Like, I'm already spending a bunch of money. Let's just make it the best I can. Because I'd rather make a good game and have it fail financially and be at least like, well, that was good, than be like, well, I didn't take as much risk as I could have and the game wasn't as good. I don't know. I would have had second thoughts about that. Now, obviously, spoiler, it all worked out. Yeah, it was all fine.
You don't have to spoil our real life things, I don't think.
Yeah.
You touched on the AI art a few times. Do you want to talk about that for people who don't know the story and might have bristled at that?
Yeah, sure. There's no getting around this. I guess I probably should have mentioned this before, but for people that don't know what a game jam is, if there's anyone listening that doesn't know what a game jam is, you make a video game within a very short time frame. And I am not an artist at all. And so I had this idea for this game, and part of the actual design of the game came from what kind of art assets can we get within less than a week that would allow me to make this game about a family. And the answer it was that my friend at a studio I was working at the time had been like, hey, this Midjourney thing's really interesting. There was a website for a long time, it might still exist, called thispersondoesnotexist.com, I think. And that was always like amalgamations of people that it was art of people that don't actually exist. Like they look like photos, but they're people that don't actually exist. And he was like, hey, I can do something similar with Midjourney. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So unlike thispersondoesnotexist.com, with Midjourney, you can give them, I could say, like, I want this person to be a redhead or whatever, and I want them to look like they're from the 70s. And he said, yeah. And so for us, it was like this interesting new toy at the time. We didn't really know much about it. And so I said, well, hey, what if I build this game where it's this family, and can you get me AI art? And he said yes. And so I had this whole family tree. I started making quick descriptions of each one, and he'd generate a ton of different people. And then I just used the one that I felt was most representative of what I was going for. And that came out of the fact that I needed to get it done very, very fast. And I am not an artist. If you were to look at any art that I've ever made, it's terrible. And so this was like every other Game Jam game that I had made, intended to just be this personal project that I wasn't even sure. I would probably release it for free, and no one would play it. No one on earth would ever check it out, just like every other Game Jam game I've made. And so when it came time for the Game Jam was judged, a lot of the judges were like, hey, this is really interesting. You should keep working on this. And I said, okay. So I did. And it never really crossed my mind to replace the AI art because I was never going to sell it because of the AI art. And I could never afford to replace the AI art, so I never would feel comfortable selling it. Basically, it came this spiral of I'm not even going to really touch the art. I left the art that's in there, for the most part, with maybe one or two small exceptions, is the same art we had after that first weekend. And so the art just kind of became an ends to a means for everything else in the game that I did do myself. So I wrote all the stuff. I programmed it entirely. You know, Robin mentioned earlier the interface, it was functional. It was very rough, but it worked. And that was because I'm not a great programmer either. My entire career up to this point has just been as a designer. So all the programming and all the art are the two pieces that I normally don't do in my day-to-day job. And I just kind of used what I could to get this game into a state where it was a full game. And even then, one of the reasons earlier I mentioned the whole Discord thing, one of the reasons I put that Discord thing in, I didn't know. I had no way of knowing if anyone would play this. My entire marketing was going to the Oberdin subreddit and going, hey, I released a game. Please, for the love of God, check out my game that I spent 11 months working on. And I didn't know if anyone would. Luckily, it went really well. And if I had the knowledge that it would go really well and people would be that interested, I would have paid an artist 100%. But for me, not to get too much into my past, even outside of games, I've had these huge passion projects that I've worked on that have taken months and months and months. And part of the what's in the back of my head when working on those things is when I release this, I'm putting all this time and effort in so that when people experience it, they will enjoy it. And then I would release it and nothing would happen. Like no one would care. And it was like crushing. And so with Roottrees, I was already in the mindset that there's a very real chance. I want to set up my expectations that no one will play this game. I spent 11 months on it, and I got into a state where I was really happy with it, and people that I play tested with were really happy with it. But that's no guarantee that more than those play testers, there's no way to get it out into the world in a way where people can experience it. And so I never spent any other time on the art or even the programming. Like there's a lot of programming choices I would have gone back and fixed some things if I had known. But you don't know until you do something. And so when Robin reached out to me, the game was already a success. But it was a success in the way that, again, I wasn't making any money off of it because I wasn't trying to make money off of it. To me, the success was that, hey, people are finally enjoying a thing that I built for the enjoyment of people. And that was great. But during those many months of development, yes, the AI art, like the discourse became intense. And I was in the games industry and I was talking to artists, and they were like, hey, the way that this works is really unfair to artists. And these are people that I'm friends with and I respect a lot of them. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. So I get it. I understand where your concerns are. Still, I can't pay for this because I don't think I'll make any money back. So I will never charge for this game. That's the conclusion I came to is I will release this game for free so people can experience the stuff that was quote unquote handcrafted. That's all the engineering and all the writing, which is a significant amount of writing. But I'll never charge for it because I don't want to profit off of the backs of all the people whose art was stolen to make the art in the game. And that's kind of where it landed at the end of the release of the itch.io version.
I've spoken to some people, or like I'll say, like I've read online community, because like some people bring up the AI art with this version, especially because there's concerns. Oh, does the Steam version have it? And we have to be like, no, it doesn't. We've fully replaced it. But some people take a hardline position, which is like, there's no ethical way to use AI art and stuff like that. And I believe that there's no ethical way to charge for it. And I think Jeremy agrees, like, well, he said as much as just now that like it's unethical to charge money for it. But as a prototype, like the truth is the game literally would not exist without the AI art. Like it's the game, you couldn't have played it. So for me, the way I look at it is like having an awesome game versus not, that's pretty cool. But I see why he released it for free. And that was one of the major obstacles to putting it on Steam, was like this thing. Like, well, at the time, Steam didn't allow AI art, but also we just didn't feel that it was right. But yeah, it's kind of crazy to me that like I guess I respect on some level where some people they take like a hard line. Like I just think this is bad overall, rather than a more nuanced thing. Like I respect their consistency, but I also personally would prefer to have a game than not have a game.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you for going into that. No, it's not as happy and exciting a topic as some of the other stuff we talked about.
I think it's important to talk about, to keep talking about it. I wanted to be very clear, and I've been trying to be very clear from the beginning that I think that there is an opportunity for people to do something similar to what I've done in the future, but I'm very, very much against ever charging for it. I think you're making the decision that if you use AI art, you do not make money off of that. That's my stance. And I think that it will lead to more, eventually, it may lead to more situations like this, where someone out there who can't do art for whatever reason, maybe it's just lack of talent, like me, or maybe it could be like something else. I think it's going to lead to some interesting stuff, and that's Robin and I are in agreement that I'm not fully against the idea of it existing, but I am definitely 100% against the idea of anyone trying to use it to profit, because you are basically stealing when you do that. So.
Yeah, complex, but I think that's a pretty reasonable position to have.
Do you have any questions for us?
One thing that comes up frequently is, what do you call this genre of game? And, I've spoken to other game developers and I've discussed it with Jeremy. And it's actually super hard to come up with something that seems to it seems to satisfy all the requirements. I know that I believe you've come up with the term thinky games, and this is, I would say Roottrees is absolutely a thinky game, but I've heard some people say detective game. Andrew Plotkin, game designer who worked on Inform and who ran Neuroscope, he came up with, I like the term static deduction, but that might be a bit too much. Some people say deduction, but then you think of games like Werewolf. So I'm just kind of curious, what do you think would be a good term for this type of game?
Internally, we shorthand to detective game, although that's not a perfect description for the reasons you've laid out. I personally like deduction game, with the caveat that we're not talking about social deduction games, which is like what an Among Us is. That is a social deduction game. That is, you are solving things in a multiplayer context, but like in a in a single player context, yes, it's a deduction game. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, thinky is definitely a broader.
It's a useful term, but it's not a particularly descriptive term.
Yes, the way I always think about thinky is that it is not a genre of game so much as it is a mode of play. It is the type of gameplay experience where the game is happening in your head as you're figuring things out, more than it is like Alan and I disagree over this, but like I would also call Tetris a puzzle game, but I would never call it a thinky game because that is a very dexterity driven game. Alan would not call it a puzzle game. That is the difference.
The official Dracneck podcast position on Tetris is it's not a puzzle game.
I don't know. The podcast intro says I'm your host every single time. Anyways.
Yeah, I call these games detective games. There's something interesting where like detective has it's got as much of a thematic tilt to it as it does a gameplay implication. And I think some of the reasons why detective game as a genre name doesn't fit with people can sometimes be that like it implies something about that theme that's not always there, even if it's always there for the gameplay. But I still think it's the most descriptive and like self-explanatory genre name for this space. I've seen recently people trying to push the suggestion of fill in the blank games, and I find that interesting, but it hits the same thing as like static deduction to me of like, sure, I can see how if you know what that genre means, you could see what the through line is, but I don't think you could say fill in the blanks to somebody who doesn't know what that term already means and have them get it. Whereas I think with detective, it's much simpler to go like, oh, it's a detective game, like, and somebody can hear that and go, okay, I can get the kind of gist.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think it's interesting, like, about your final point there about, whether you would understand it. Like, I'm thinking of a fairly new genre. I guess it's not that new anymore, but Battle Royale. Like, that, it wasn't clear to me what that meant.
Well, it's based on the movie, right?
Yeah, that's just based literally. There's a movie called Battle Royale.
Right. So if you haven't seen the movie, but I mean,
yes,
but that serves a point. Like it's not intuitive. You don't intuitively understand just based on.
Oh yeah, 100%.
I'm not sure how important it is to name a genre. I feel like what's really interesting, even amongst the games in this genre, like Oberdin and Golden Idol, and now Roottrees, and like some of the other ones, but people don't agree on which ones are good because there's like differences between them, right? So someone could be like, oh, I really enjoyed Oberdin, what should I play next? And the logical answers are the big ones in the genre. But there are people that liked Oberdin that don't like Golden Idol, and there are people that like Golden Idol that don't like Roottrees, and there are people that like Roottrees that don't like Oberdin even, which I thought was crazy. And it's because usually my answer is, well, what part did you like about that? You know, why did you like that game? Because some people are like, oh man, I can't stand walking around the 3D world in Oberdin. I can't do it. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I understand that. And so I think just lumping things together because they have similar mechanics is less important than figuring out what someone's actually asking, I guess. And I know that it's nice to have a shorthand for a genre, but I don't think it's that important in the grand scheme of things. So I think everyone could just call it whatever they want, and it's fine.
I agree with that.
So what's next? You're remaking Type Help?
We are, yes. Yeah. So just like how Robin reached out to me and said, hey, Roottrees is cool. What if we remake it? Robin and I had some discussions. We really enjoyed working together a whole lot on the Roottrees remake. And so when it came time to figure out what to do next, one of the discussions we had was, hey, this game came out. We both played it, Type Help. I think I got it from Robin or something like that. It definitely was kicking around in the Roottrees Discord and in the places where we discuss games. And so I checked it out and I was like, man, you're right. That is a really good game. And so we were like, well, is there room for improvement? Probably. It has no art, has no music. It's text-based, which turns some people off. It didn't bug me or it didn't bug Robin, I don't believe. But is there room for expansion and improvement? And we both said yes. So what if we just reach out to William Rouse, who's the creator of Type Help, and see if he's interested in doing something similar to what Robin did for me for Roottrees? It turns out he was very interested. So that's what we're working on next.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if, we did it once. I mean, it's hard to take too many lessons from one success, because I think it's a sample size of one. But the approach of finding a really good game on itch that already has a little bit of a buzz that people are, really enjoy, that's been proven, the puzzles are good and stuff like that, and then remastering it worked once for us. So we're going to see if it works again. I think it will. I think, like Jeremy said, I actually was very happy to play a text game, but I think there's a certain amount of people that if you put a text game on Steam would just never buy it. They want to see a picture, they want to see, some things. And then we brainstormed some ideas of well, if we were going to add images and sound to this, how would it look? How would it feel? And I think we came up with a really cool concept, and William was on board. So yeah, we're working on that. It's kind of an interesting way of we're a very small team, and I'm not sure I ever want to be a bigger one. And this felt like a natural stepping stone. We had ideas for other projects. We actually met and brainstormed for several days of what we could work on next. But there was something attractive about this, in that it was in our wheelhouse. It's a similar game. A lot of people who like Roottrees like this, so appeal to that. It's similar, a similar concept, a similar solved thing. So it felt people say you should crawl, walk, run. It felt like maybe the next obvious step. So that's what we're doing. And so far, the community reception seems to be really positive. The people are excited that we're working on this game. So yeah, I'm hoping it works out.
Yeah, I think it's interesting with Roottrees, Jeremy was kind of hands off for a lot of the development, and now with Incident at Galley House, you're both going to be actively working on it at the same time, and also you've got William involved as well. So yeah, it's going to be a bit of a different development vibe.
It will, but William has a full-time job, and just like I did during Roottrees, he is definitely involved. And especially at the beginning, there's a lot of conversations, but he can't be as involved in the day-to-day going-ons. And so the thing about game development, this, now we're getting into the weeds, but there's a lot of what I would call kind of busy work, tedious stuff. So Robin is going to be doing pretty much all the same things that he did on Roottrees, and in terms of programming and building the game and putting it together and making sure things function. But what I'm able to take off of his plate is a lot of the stuff right now, for example, I'm recording. So the game is, for those of you that don't know, that have never played Type Help, it's a game about dialogue. And in the original, it's about reading the dialogue, like a transcript, but we are switching that up to being about listening to the dialogue. And so we will be recording with professional voice actors, but to get the game functional, we want to have the dialogue. And so there's 1,600 voice lines, and right now I'm recording all of them. You're going to be able to play the game with not you, as in the people out there. We're never going to release this because, dear God,
Jeremy DLC. Let's make it happen.
The Jeremy DLC is not coming.
Optional setting.
No, please. Oh, God. No one likes to hear the sound of their own voice. But
I don't know. April Fool's patch.
You don't want to hear me play all the characters. But yeah, so it's that kind of stuff. So Robin doesn't need to do that. And that, how much time I'm saving him. That kind of thing is what we're working on. Now, obviously, I'm also a game designer. So when it comes time to change up the things that need to be changed from the version, like the interface and art and how it's displayed to the player and how people are going to experience things, that's all stuff that I have input on. But I want to be very clear that just like when Robin was making changes to Roottrees, he never just made a change. He would come to me and be like, hey, at the beginning of the process, here's all the changes we're planning on making. And then we would work through them together. And he did do some of the work completely on his own. Like the note-taking system was all Robin, essentially, and it's one of the best parts of the new game. But for everything that was an interpretation of the stuff that was originally in the story and originally had to do with the characters. I was heavily involved with that, just like William. That's his focus, is making sure that we don't destroy his game.
Yeah.
So,
Because it's going to be different.
there's a lot
it
to
is.
do. It is a little different, but I don't think it feels that different. I mean, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but right now I'm just trying to do the things to keep Robin from having to do the things that are time wasting.
I agree. But it's also, time wasting is that's a negative way to look at it. Like, this is all beneficial game dev stuff. Like, another thing Jeremy's helped out with is like briefs. Like, we've had to do, for casting the characters, for the details of the rooms. Actually, that was somewhat collaborative, like figuring out the layout of Galley House and how the art should work, and getting that all ready. So there's actually a ton of work, and it's all beneficial. It is interesting what you said, like, because I remember during Roottrees, like for example, the first interface I had for the family tree, I did it like, it didn't look like a corkboard at all, like your version. It was like an Art Deco style wallpaper, and it was more mystery vibe, like I was thinking like 1920s mystery, and it looked okay. But some of the initial prototypes I did for filling in people were just honestly not good. And I think it's like sometimes it just takes a few tries to do things. So like I'm like, oh, this could work really well. I have an idea. Then I, pop it down, try clicking, and then it's like, oh, it actually doesn't feel good. So there was a fair amount of that. And I think Galley House will be the same. Like, I just feel like I honestly have always thought that quality is really a function of time. And like, there's people who will say, oh, I'm bad at user interfaces. And I'm like, well, how much time did you spend on it? Because like, I'm probably bad at user interfaces too. I'm just willing to keep at it until it feels good, and constantly, try this, try this, try this, try this, and then just keep shaving off, sanding off the hard edges until it feels reasonably good. And I think that's what Galley House is going to be for the next like while.
Awesome. Where can people go to check it out? Where can people follow you?
I'm mostly active on Blue Sky as Evil Trout. But if you want to sign up for our mailing list, you can go to eviltrout.com. We use it sparingly, so don't worry about us spamming you too often. We'll only use it when we have a big thing to announce. But the number one thing you could do right now is wishlist The Incident at Galley House on Steam. Like, that's the easiest way to support us.
And if you do want to just get in touch with us and talk to us, I guess the best way to do that is through our Discord. Now, the way that you can find that is through the Roottrees Are Dead. I've been trying to be pretty careful about not posting the Discord link all over the internet, because I know that's how you get random spammers that come in and like try and scam your people, scam the people on your channel. But if you are in either the main version of the Roottrees Are Dead on Steam, or even in the itch.io version, there should be a link to the Discord in there. And we're always just hanging around, willing to talk. Like, people can pretty much ask us anything. So
remarkably accessible.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, I just love this style of game, and like, there's a bunch of people who work on prototypes and stuff and say, hey, try my game in our other puzzle games channel, and I love to do that. So if you're making a game like this, I'd love to try it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining and for chatting with us for all things deductive games.
No, thanks for having me.
And thank you for listening to the Trackneck and Friends official podcast. Our music is by Priscilla Snow, who you can find at ghoulnoise.bandcamp.com. Our podcast artwork is by Adam DeGrandis. Our podcast is edited by Melanie Zawodniak. Please rate and review us on your podcast service of choice, and be sure to tune in next episode for more interesting conversations.